The 1920s to 1950s were known as the Golden Age of Hollywood, which was an amazing time, when some of the most significant stars were created and some of the best films were made. But all that came crashing down when the studio system inevitably collapsed under its own weight from complications due to rampant alcoholism and pesky antitrust laws. The old actors drank like fishes while attending posh parties. It's no wonder that many of Hollywood's leading women and men fell victim to addictive behaviors. Today, we're talking about the biggest stars who were notoriously drunk in and around Hollywood. Elizabeth Taylor. Although she was well known for her beauty and brilliance in movies, Elizabeth Taylor also battled drinking for many years and developed a painkiller addiction. In 1983, Taylor was the first famous person to check herself into the Betty Ford Center. The wife of U.S. President Gerald Ford, Betty Ford, battled similar problems before receiving the assistance she required in 1978 and eventually opening the rehabilitation facility to assist others. Elizabeth probably didn't realize the significant impact her courage to confront her addiction had on many who were suffering in silence. Elizabeth Taylor brought residential treatment out of the shadows of negativity towards hope and recovery for millions of Americans. And free from the bonds of addiction, Taylor finally had the breath to realize an even more important calling than acting as a champion for AIDS awareness, prevention, and cures. Richard Burton. It would be ridiculous to claim that everyone is constantly intoxicated, but Richard Burton may be the closest to that ideal. Burton began drinking at the age of 12 and continued doing so against medical advice and personal turmoil until his death at the age of 58, his body being as severely damaged by alcohol as any that medical science had ever seen. Burton is best known for his roles as Shakespeare on stage and television, his work with Peter O'Toole, and films like Cleopatra and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, with his on-again wife Elizabeth Taylor. When they were together, Richard would begin drinking as soon as he woke up in the morning, continue until he fell asleep, and then repeat. His routine was to start with a case of beer and work on that through the morning. Once he had that polished off, he would switch to hard liquor. Taylor, by comparison, was a relative teetotaler. She didn't start drinking with her husband until 10 a.m. In 1964's The Night of the Iguana, Burton demanded a private bar at the top of the staircase that led to the set and another one at the bottom. He passed away unexpectedly in 1984 due to a brain hemorrhage. By the time it was over, Burton had developed abnormal proportions in his kidneys, and his spine was completely covered in alcohol crystals. Cary Grant. In the 1950s, Cary Grant made the decision to seek treatment for his alcoholism. Grant's doctor recommended LSD, a cutting-edge treatment at the time, to treat his alcoholism. Grant loved the trips he took on the drug and introduced some of his friends to it. Judy Bellabon, the daughter of Paramount president, stated, quote, "I figured if it was good enough for Cary Grant, it was good enough for me." Grant is believed to have taken LSD about 100 times while being treated, but it changed his outlook on life and he lived happily until passing away at the age of 82. Peter O'Toole. Peter O'Toole's dazzling, brilliant blue eyes make it difficult to understand that he was one of Hollywood's leading drinkers. He allegedly claimed to David Letterman that drinking was a habit unique to his generation, no matter if they had obligations that day or not. O'Toole insisted that drinking improved his on-screen performances. Do you recall the scene from Lawrence of Arabia where the camel attack was finished? Umar Sharif and O'Toole decided to be fully drunk for the whole scenario since they both reportedly had a fear of camels. They don't call it liquid courage for nothing. When others asked about the scenario, O'Toole laughs because he can't recall it. Frank Sinatra. Many people believed Frank Sinatra was a functioning alcoholic. He said his favorite was Jack Daniels. 4 ice cubes, 2 fingers of Jack, and a dash of water in a classic rocks glass made up his signature drink. He allegedly drank a full bottle of Jack Daniels every day by himself. His doctor was in shock. Sinatra lived in the spotlight wherever he went. I guess you could say that he lived by the mantra, "The best is yet to come." But this was not always the case. Sinatra could turn mean when he was drunk. He occasionally got into arguments with journalists or other actors. Your care was required. When she observed him drinking gin, one of his wives claimed she locked herself in their room since that's when he got angry. Frank, his buddies, and a few other Hollywood elites were dubbed the American Olympic Drinking Team. Sinatra passed away in 1998 at the age of 82. He was buried with a bottle of Jack Daniels in his casket. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford was married to the CEO of PepsiCo, and she was given a position as the official ambassador for Pepsi. Being a well-known actress, her husband figured that this would be a wise business decision. Joan toured the world as Pepsi's ambassador, and at each stop of the tour, she requested to be provided with 2/5 of Smirnoff, 1/5 of Old Forester bourbon, 1/5 of Scotch, 1/5 of Beefeater gin, 2 bottles of champagne, and, of course, a case of Pepsi. I'm glad it was Pepsi and we didn't have to add Coke to the party. Michael Landon. In television, Michael Landon, who was most known for his work on Bonanza and Little House on the Prairie, represented the ideal of the decent, well-behaved man. He did it for decades. The ideal picture was frequently obscured by his alcohol and Valium addiction. His co-stars knew that he drank some, but they had no idea just how much he was drinking on set. Landon would add whiskey to his coffee and vodka to other soft drinks. They would go to the bar to continue drinking once the day's filming had finished. Landon's Little House daughter, Melissa Gilbert, stated that as a kid, she didn't know he sipped vodka from his coffee mug. But, quote, "I'm sure he's one reason why I almost always picked men who smelled like alcohol. He took painkillers, alcohol, and 4 packs of unfiltered cigarettes a day, which contributed to the development of pancreatic cancer, which ultimately took his life. He was just 54 years old." Dean Martin, the king of cool, once stated, quote, "I feel sorry for people who don't drink. When they wake up in the morning, that's as good as they're going to feel all day." Martin's stage presence was mostly focused on his charming drinking. However, according to his daughter and several close friends, Dino was only drinking apple juice at the time. Just having a drink and a cigarette in his hand increased people's respect for him. Men wanted to be him and the women wanted to be with him. But he was a kind father, always home for dinner, and only had 1 cocktail with his wife during the evening. So although Dean Martin's career is alcohol-related, he seems to have danced with the devil but knew the right time to call it quits. Dean passed away in 1995 at the age of 78. Leonard Nimoy. When the iconic Star Trek series was being filmed, Leonard Nimoy, or should I say Mr. Spock, struggled with an alcohol addiction. Later on, Nimoy admitted that he started drinking to help him get through the long days on the Star Trek set. William Shatner stated that Nimoy drank to numb the sheer disappointment of stardom, and 1 drink turned into 2, and before Leonard knew it, his addictive personality kicked in and he couldn't stop. After the show's filming had up, he checked himself into rehab. When he was 83 years old, Nimoy's second habit of smoking took his life. Robert Shaw. Big Sharks, Choppy Water, and Testy Corkers made the filming of 1975's Jaws an absolute nightmare for most of the people involved. During the lengthy filming days, Robert Shaw sipped on scotch, which led to conflict with his co-star Richard Dreyfuss. Shaw was drunk in most of the film with the exception of 1 scene, the scene where his character actually gets drunk. Later, Richard Dreyfuss admitted that he enjoyed Shaw when he was sober but hated him when he was drunk. Once, Dreyfus actually took a glass of booze out of Shaw's hand and dumped it overboard into the ocean.